Hey everyone, it's Helen from SME Deal Hunter. Today we have Mitchell Sorkin, aka the ATM guy. Excited to learn about Mitchell's story, acquiring a whole bunch of ATM machines. Yeah, Mitchell, great to have you today.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate you having me on here.
Look, let's get started. I would love to hear more about your background. Can you share with everyone sort of how you got into this whole game?
Um, so yeah, I grew up in a family of Russian immigrants. Didn't have any exposure to entrepreneurial DNA growing up. My family came here and went out and got degrees, became engineers and statisticians. And growing up, education was like the main thing that was stressed in my family. But I figured out like at a really early age that I was kind of like a lemonade stand kid. Got really into Craigslist flips in high school, and then in college started to kind of like formalize that, got into e-commerce, and I spent most of my 20s building internet businesses. So my first legitimate business was an e-commerce startup. And when I moved out to LA, I kind of had this rags to riches to rags story where um, basically started selling a product, it took off, and then I got sued and lost that whole business in the span of a few months. So that was like my first real gut punch in business. Luckily, I was like 23 years old or 24 at the time, and so it was easy to bounce back. The second business I built after that, funnily enough, you were actually one of our customers.
Yep.
Uh, so Stack Influence, we started that in 2015, bootstrapped it for a few years, and then went out and started raising money from VCs. And without going into the weeds too much, I realized pretty quickly that I just was not I was not enthusiastic about the model of just like raising money and then lighting it on fire and then, scrambling to raise more money. Um, and so I just kind of desperately wanted to go back to basics and build a business that was, cash flow positive from day one. And a friend of mine suggested I get on SMB Twitter, which I had never heard of. And I kind of like fell in love within the first couple weeks on there. And so I just started soaking up information, reading about ETA and search. And my brother and I decided we are going to buy a business in early 2021. And we spent probably 6 to 8 months just kind of like scouring through deals, looking at laundromats and gas stations and liquor stores. We weren't really sure exactly what we wanted. Um, and then we really randomly stumbled into an ATM deal. And I spoke to the seller. The route was much bigger than we were willing to buy for our first go. I think he was selling like maybe 400 machines. And I told my brother, I was like, I'm just going to ask this guy if he could sell us three. And my brother was like, there's no way he's going to sell you three machines. I met with the guy and he was like, yeah, sure. And so that was perfect for us. I feel like we really hit the lottery because that first deal was $36,000, which in like, in business buying is like literally, $10, the equivalent of um and so we got this like really low risk entry into the business, and we ran those three machines for 5 or 6 weeks, and we were like, this is incredible. The machines are really easy to figure out. It's essentially just like a safe with a laptop built on top of it. So mechanically it's really easy to fix these machines. Most of the parts can just like be swapped out by unplugging one wire and unscrewing a couple screws. Um so yeah, we ran those for 5 weeks, and then we bought another 15 from him, and then we bought 30 more, and then we were just kind of like off to the races from there.
Wow. And what does your team look like now? Is it still just you and your brother, or have you brought on other people? And what does your day-to-day role look like now? Now that you own over 800
Yeah.
units.
So the one thing that I love about ATMs, and one of the reasons that we fell in love with it early on, is that labor intensity is extremely low. Um, One of the main things that needs to be done when you run an ATM portfolio is actually loading the machines, and that can be outsourced to either armored trucks or other ATM operators. And so once you outsource the cash loading of the ATMs, the work that's left is really just kind of like administrative back office stuff. And so today our team is me and my brother. We have one cash loader that loads a portion of our portfolio. So that's machines that we actually load with our own money. But I'd say off the top of my head, probably 80-ish% of the route is completely outsourced. So we have one back office guy and then we have one VA. So those are like the actual in-house employees. Obviously, there's a ton of subcontractors, which are basically the vaulters that are loading the other machines.
Got it. No, that's super interesting. Where are you now finding these opportunities? You mentioned the first guy who, you just came across that was what had 400 units, but where are you finding the rest now?
Yeah, so that was on Biz Buy Sell. Um, I found some other listed deals. I've gone to all of the industry conferences and just kind of like walked around and networked, and so I've gotten deals that way. Um, One of the best deals that we did was brought to me by a guy who worked for our processor, who's a good friend now. So it's just a mix of like off-market stuff coming my way, and then you see stuff listed, and usually it's overpriced, and you just like put in an offer at like 60% of asking, and they tell you no, and then 8 months later they come back and nobody bought it for their ridiculous price. And so um yeah, that's been most of the deal flow has been that.
Has it mostly been retiring owners or, given that's a fairly low lift operation, why are these people selling?
Yeah, so the one that I said that came from the processor was a really old guy. The guy was like 83 years old and was loading all of the machines himself.
Wow.
I'd say like, a big part of the reason that people sell ATMs is because although you can run it in the way I described, where you outsource all of the cash loading and you have a back office guy who handles everything, and then you just kind of like, sit back and make sure that the pieces are moving properly. Um, Vast majority of ATM operators do not operate that way. So like most of these guys built their routes by like going out, pounding the pavement, walking into stores, placing one machine at a time. And they wake up 15 years later and they have 150 or 200 machines, but they still drive around. They load all of the machines themselves. They when something breaks, they show up and fix it. They get merchants calling them, angry merchants for whatever reason, like, the machine is down and it's the first of the month. Um, and so, although it can be very operationally light, to them, it doesn't seem that way. And when you spend 17 years of your life driving around filling ATM machines, you could get sick of it a lot faster than I do. So,
No, that's super interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
I'm really curious in terms of, we last spoke, and I thought people would like to know, one of the questions I asked you on in our last conversation was, isn't cash going away? Where's the future of the ATM business? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's a big misconception around ATMs. People, and this isn't unique to ATMs. People always have this idea of like, well, I wouldn't buy that, so who would ever buy this, right? Um, ATMs are largely selling convenience. So, you have to understand that people who walk into a store and realize they need cash will take the cash out of the ATM even if they have to spend $3 rather than saving that $3 to drive to a bank. So that's the first part. And that's a minor part of the whole argument that I have here. But the second is that there's 75 to 80 million Americans who are unbanked or underbanked. So these are people that are receiving monthly deposits on EBT or other government programs. And these people literally do not have access to bank accounts. And the same way that there are food deserts in the US, there are banking deserts. And so, like, you can drive through parts of Los Angeles, for example, and you won't find a bank branch for like miles. And so, the only access to cash that these people have is, the corner store that is down the street from them. Um, and so, although I do think cash is at risk in the long run, I think it's just going to take much longer than people think. And a lot of the people that I've spoken to who've been in ATMs for 15 to 20 years have been hearing this argument since like the early 2000s, right? So I know a guy who got into the business in 2009 and everyone told him like, you're way too late to the party. Cash is going to die. And, here he is 15, 16 years later, just, still printing money. So, um, I think, I think like if there is a decline rate, it's probably in the like 2, 3, 4% a year range. And, if you can buy these things at 2 years of cash flow, I don't really see how that's kind of a factor to consider.
Right. That's something that a lot of people don't talk about. It's like, how much do you buy it for, right? Like ultimately that matters a lot more.
Yeah.
Um, and is 2x cash flow reasonable to buy a route for or
Yeah. So routes vary like vastly in terms of the multiples, right? Like you can find a route. We've purchased stuff as low as 9, 10 months of cash flow, and then we've bought as expensive as, approaching 4 years. Like with any other industry, the smaller the route, the higher the chance that you'll get it for a lower multiple. When you look at routes in the 1, 2, $3 million range, you're not going to get anything for less than 2 years. It's just, those operators are more sophisticated. They're more in tune with the market. They understand what their portfolio is worth. Um, but you can certainly find guys who have 15, 20, 30 machines, and it's like a side thing for them, and they just want to get rid of it. Um, you can definitely find stuff for 1 year, or, a year and a half of cash flow for sure.
that's crazy. That's
Yeah.
awesome. What do you look for in terms of, due diligence when you're looking at these routes? Like what are some of the considerations?
Well, I'd say the number one thing that we look at, well, I guess I'll take a step back. The first question that we ask ourselves is, are we going to outsource the route or not? If we are, then the questions are very different. So, I guess I'll start with if you're going to be loading the machines yourself. If you're going to be loading the machines yourself, one of the most important things to consider is route density, right? So you want 30 machines that are all in like a 50 block radius instead of driving, 35, 40 minutes to each machine. Um, so, the density of the route's really important. How long have the machines been there? Do the machines have contracts with the locations? What is the actual language in those contracts? Um, and then also, how long has the store where the machine is been in business itself, right? Because if a store opened up 8 months ago, it's there's a higher likelihood that it'll go out of business than something that's been open for 15 years. Um, so I guess a lot of those points that I just mentioned would apply to both scenarios. But the second scenario where we outsource, um, we basically need to look into, are there vaulting relationships in place right now? If there aren't, it's a little bit of a heavier lift, because if you're buying from a seller who's been driving around and loading the machines himself for 5, 10 years, whatever, the merchants see that guy or gal every single day, and so they are the face of that company. And so if he sells to me and all of a sudden I just send in some other guy who's going to start loading, that just opens up the door for merchants to demand more, say they want to get paid more, say they want to get rid of you, they like the old guy. So you want to kind of avoid that situation as much as possible. Sometimes it's not possible, and you just kind of have to bite the bullet. And then in that scenario, you use that as leverage to negotiate a lower multiple and say, look, I'm very likely to lose accounts in this transition. And so, yeah, those are some of the questions we ask. Obviously, like on bigger acquisitions, we do all of the standard diligence stuff. So, tax returns, P&Ls, like really dig in deep. But we've purchased routes of like 20 or 25 machines without like really basically without looking at anything. Because if a guy's selling it at 10 months and we look at the transaction reports and we look up the locations online, and it's just like, I don't even care if I lose half of this route tomorrow, it's still okay, right? So, but yeah, that's kind of high level.
No, that's super interesting. And how do the margins compare when you're looking at someone who, is loading these himself versus having it fully outsourced? And, what is sort of optimal for you margin wise?
Um, it's a hard question to answer. Well, obviously, if you're buying something in Kentucky and you live in LA, you have no choice but to outsource it, right? You can't send somebody 200 grand to go load your machines in another state. It's just not going to work. Um, but I would say that, the total gross number of dollars that you make when you load yourself is obviously higher, right? Because you pay out per transaction to vaulters. So typically the going rate is $1 per transaction. Um, but you no longer have any labor costs. You no longer have the extra cash outlay that's sitting in the machines. You can now take that cash and go buy more machines with it, right? So there's that like opportunity cost equation there. Um, it's hard to answer which one's better. I think, outsourcing is certainly more scalable. And when you talk to guys who have 3 or 4 thousand machines, all of them have outsourced, right? With the exception of with a few. Like the route that we bought that's in the middle of the country, the guys that load it for us have 900 locations and they load everything themselves. They have 6 or 7 employees driving around. And they've kind of like they have a stronghold in that market. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'd say like the only reason we load some stuff ourselves and then outsource others is because when we first started, we had no choice, right? We started with 3 and then we bought another 15. And at that point, we didn't really even understand this whole vaulting situation. Um, and as we started to kind of like build out that route, um, it just became very dense and very convenient to just like continue vaulting it ourselves. And and then we brought on our cash loader who I've known, I just happened to have known this guy for like 20 years and trust him with my life. And so it just made things a lot easier that like I don't have the headache of like, is this guy stealing from me? Um and so yeah, that's the only reason we kept that around. But like moving forward, I'd say 90 to 95% of the stuff that we buy is going to be outsourced.
Got it. No, that's super interesting. I'm sure one question that a lot of people want to know is how are you financing these deals?
Yeah. So the first 6 or 7 deals we did were just with our own money. At some point in there, I started raising some private debt, so just selling promissory notes. Um, we have since gotten an SBA loan on one of our deals, which was super exciting. I was told from the beginning that like don't even dream about SBA. It's impossible. They'll never give you a loan. We got it done somehow, mostly thanks to Twitter, as always. But
Amazing.
but yeah, our deals have been a mix of our own cash, bank lending, private debt, and then we have uh 4 equity investors, so two in each of the 2 big deals that we did last year.
Got it. How are you thinking about financing moving forward with future deals? Are you leaning one way or the other?
Um, it's like that's a ongoing question that I don't know that I have the answer to. Obviously I would like to just have an incredibly large debt facility that I just have access to. Um, haven't gotten that done yet. So I don't know. For the time being, I think we're just trying to take it one step at a time. And when we get a good deal, we put our heads together and think like, what is the best outcome here for investors and for us? And and just try to come up with a solution that works. I mean, it's just the problem with ATMs is that it's not like real estate where you can just, go to any bank and they'll write you a check. Um, you really have to like you really have to grind it out on the debt side. The good news is that like, LP capital is freely available. So um I think we are I think we're just going to try to continue to cultivate good relationships with equity investors and then, really like continue to pound our head against a wall to get debt financing and hope to break through. I mean, the fact that we got the SBA loan was great. The thing is that deal, the seller had perfect books, like a very itemized P&L for that route, did not commingle expenses with any other business. It was just very easy to be like, this is what the route makes. These are the transaction histories. This is his P&L. And like they just understood it, right? But like every other deal I've looked at is not like that. I'm sure like you look at
Yeah.
these, it's like it's always a mess. So
No, that's interesting. It's amazing you were able to get an SBA loan. It must
Yeah.
be really hard for the ATM routes. And what's sort of next? Are you doubling down on ATM routes? Are you gonna diversify into other sort types of businesses? What's your guys' thinking now?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am not handcuffing myself to ATMs. I think it's a great business, but I think there's, a ton of other opportunity out there. The cool thing about ATMs is that it's just kind of like a microcosm of this bigger world of these machine-based businesses. So, um, there's opportunity in pool tables and jukeboxes, believe it or not.
Wow.
Vending. I mean, traditional vending, I am not super interested in because I think, storing food and dealing with expiration dates and all of that is a giant headache. Um, but yeah, we're just gonna continue to look for good deals. Obviously, when stuff pops up at 1 year of cash flow, I just like will write the check right away. Um, and and just like really continue to plug away. I mean, going back to the future of cash, like I don't want to just put all of my eggs in one basket. I'm not necessarily going to want to be in ATMs 20 years from now. I'm happy to be in it for the next decade, but beyond that, I really don't know. And so yeah, I think like capital intensive but operationally light businesses are our sweet spot. We seem to manage capital well, and I'd rather not have like 60 landscapers to manage. So probably avoid those types of businesses and kind of like lean in this direction.
That no, that makes sense. Super interesting with jukeboxes. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
What
Yeah. They're
Yeah,
amazing.
tell us more. Tell us more. I want to hear about this.
Sure. Well, the jukebox space is really interesting because there are really only two players that offer it. There's a company called Touch Tunes, and the other one is AMC, I believe. I might be off on that. But anyway, both of these companies do not allow bar owners to own their own jukebox. And so that's huge, right? They protect the operators in that way. And jukeboxes are amazing because you're essentially selling air, right? Like you put this machine in, there's nothing to load into it. Like 90% of the transactions are cashless. Um, and people buy these credits, so they'll buy like 5 song credits for $5. And I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like a reasonable, like maybe 20 or 30% of those credits never even get used. Not that it even matters if they do, because it's like essentially,
Right.
there's no
It's
cost.
air.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's an amazing business, but it's mostly legacy operators. I haven't seen much stuff for sale. It's really hard to place them. But one of the routes we bought came with 3 jukebox locations, and it's amazing. We just, I don't know, collect like $3,500 every month, and I've never done a single thing. Like we've literally, it's the closest thing I've seen to a truly passive business, although we're probably, we've been fortunate that nothing's gone wrong. I'm sure the machine can break and you have to show up on a Friday night to fix it because the bar owner will get really upset if you don't. So like, I know that people who have big jukebox routes obviously have lots of work to do. But in terms of like the day-to-day operations, it's pretty incredible.
That's amazing. I mean, speaking of day-to-day operations, what does your day look like now? How does it compare to with Stack Influence, the VC backed company you were running before? What does that look like?
Well, nowadays I'm mostly just like looking for deals, trying to get the current deals on our desk done, trying to raise money, trying to put out content. I have a couple other side projects I'm working on. So as far as like day to day for the existing route, um, obviously our office admin has questions that, he brings to me, like stuff that decisions he can't really make. So there's some of that. Operational improvements that we're trying to make to the existing route, like raising prices, is a tricky thing because some merchants never come into their store. They just have like a clerk sitting there and they've never even looked at the machine. Others are in there every single day. And if you raise it by 25 cents, they're going to call you, screaming. So, you know, I do some digging into that to try to come up with a strategy to raise prices. Um, But yeah, overall, I think I'm spending like, I don't know, 10 to 15% of my time in the business. And, largely that's because my brother handles a lot of that. Like my brother doesn't do any of the investor facing or deal facing stuff. So, um, he's very good at, running the ops. So I would say, maybe 10% of my time is spent on the business itself, and the rest of the time um trying to put out content and trying to put out a newsletter and be a little bit more like you. But yeah, so yeah, I think that's how my time is split. And I've been traveling to conferences a good amount. A lot of good has come from that in the last couple of years, so I'm trying to just like double down on that strategy.
Yeah, no, I think conferences are super underrated. People don't want to in this like remote work day, nobody wants to travel anymore. But
Yeah.
no, that's interesting. Are these all ATM route conferences or?
Not only, no. There's two main ATM conferences. One is called NAC and the other is called ATMIA. NAC was last fall. ATMIA just happened last month. But then there's also AMOA, which is the amusements conference. So that's jukeboxes and pool tables and arcade games, all of that. There's the bar and nightclub show. There are processor specific conferences. So one of our processors, PAI, which is owned by Brinks, had a conference back in January in Dominican Republic. So I went to that. Um, but I mean, if you really want to, you could go to a conference every month, right? There's so many of them. There's a strip club show. I mean, yeah.
And are you meeting other owners who, are potentially selling through these conferences? Or yeah,
That's my main goal for
yeah,
sure.
that's great. Anything sort of unexpected about the business buying process um, that you sort of experienced?
Well, in the beginning, I certainly felt like everything I was buying was, a scam, right? It was just like, I mean, it's just like it's hard to believe when you buy ATMs, right? Like most people are like, my parents especially were like, "What in God's name are you doing? Like, do not buy this. Like, there's no chance that this is going to end well for you." Um, I don't know. It's just like a very informal process because most of the sellers are very unsophisticated, right? Like a lot of these guys are, really hardworking guys that came from like some blue collar field that ended up, like I said, just like pounding the pavement over 10, 15, 20 years. And so, yeah, it's just, I think uh, it's probably not too far off from buying a small, landscaping route or, any of the other stuff that SMB Twitter talks about. But yeah, I think I don't know. I guess that's not the best answer, but it's the best I can come up with.
No, no, that's definitely interesting, guys. Any words of wisdom to, folks who haven't bought their first business yet, but are interested in kind of going into this ETA world?
Uh I got that question a lot on Twitter, as I'm sure you do. It's really hard for me to answer because like I said, I've been, I guess this is kind of like a cliche at this point, but I've been an entrepreneur from day one. Like I always handled risk well and handled failure well. And I think that if you don't have those qualities, you should really be cautious, like going into ETA, because stuff is always going to go wrong. Nothing goes as expected. Um, there's like larger and larger amounts of money on the line, and so I would say that words of wisdom are to like really think things through a lot in terms of like be very introspective before you buy and understand like what your strengths and weaknesses are, um, because obviously social media has a way of just like glamorizing all of this, and then it's really cool when you're like tweeting about it, but like when you're on your knees cleaning mouse shit out of a ATM, you're like, what am I doing with my life, right? So, um, yeah, I think that's my best advice. Other than that, like if you have that conversation with yourself and you think you are a good fit or you think you will be happy doing this stuff, um, my next best advice is like just do it. Just take the leap of faith. I mean, there's like there's nothing else to do besides to start, right? Like you're either going to do it or you're not. And so yeah, that's my best advice.
No, that's great advice. Speaking of cleaning mouse shit, my last question is just any crazy stories you can share.
Sure. Well, that's a real story. I this is like maybe like 6 months in. I showed up at a location and the guy had this like crazy shop vac that he like pulled out and he was like, I have to buy cats. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's mice, like there's like a infestation in the store. And I open up the machine and like there's just like all over. So the main thing that spits out the money is called the CDU, the cash dispensing unit. And it was just like covered in shit. And and he basically just like handed me gloves and he was like, you got to clean that. And I was in there and I like put a mask on and I was like cleaning this shit out for like probably an hour. And like this location made like $80 a month, right? Like I like honestly, like looking back on it, I should have just like walked out of there. But yeah, I like read about it online after, and you can catch some like horrible disease that like if you catch it, like 90% of people die. So I was like reading that on Google like late at night after cleaning the shit out of the machine. Um, so that was one horrible situation. Other than that, just like, I mean, we've been robbed, obviously. My brother pretty early on pulled into a McDonald's, like just pulled into the parking lot and walked in to use the bathroom and came out and his window was smashed. And we to this day we don't know if he was followed or whatever. So we lost like 6 or 7 grand. And that was pretty early on. And obviously it wasn't like um it wasn't the end of the world, but at the time we were like, oh, is this just gonna like happen all the time? And so um again, that's going back to like really thinking through your appetite for risk and like understanding that stuff like that is gonna happen. um but other than that, I don't have any like really crazy stories. I guess like going out into the middle of the country to look at a route that was just like truck stops in the middle of nowhere was just an interesting experience in general, like business aside. Like I had never been in that world. And it's crazy when you go out there and you realize like, wow, there's like 70% of the country is like this, just like, this vast expanse, or just like people are just driving trucks and smoking cigarettes and eating fried chicken. I don't know. That was wild. But yeah, that's the best I have for that.
No, that's super super interesting to hear. Well, Mitchell, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you? If they want to learn more, if they want to reach you, is it Twitter? Is it, I mean, or X? Or is it your newsletter? Can you tell us where to find you?
Yeah. So I am Mitchell_Sorkin on Twitter. The ATM guy should pop up. I think I'm the only ATM guy. Um, and then also I will be launching a newsletter next month. I'm trying to put all of that together and follow best practices and make it look pretty. And I've actually been doing a fair bit of studying on your newsletter. So that will be out next week and or sorry, next month, and I'll start promoting it like probably with the weeks leading up. But yeah, other than that, DM me on Twitter. Um, my email is mitchell@sorkinatm.com. You can shoot me an email if you ever want to chat. And yeah, thank you. I really, really appreciate you putting me on your platform.
Yeah, no, thanks again, Mitchell.